Support comes from Sunday Morning Cafe, founded by researcher, speaker, and therapist Dr. Tom Wagner, offering mini retreats with live music and online resources to build resilience and community. SundayMorningCafe.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. Today we bring you a special episode in extended podcast form, an in-person version of STLPR's Voter Guide, moderated by St. Louis on the Air executive producer Alex Heuer. He and STLPR's politics team recently sat together with community members to unpack the jargony language of amendments and propositions on the August 4th primary ballot. STLPR Justice reporter Rachel Lippmann, State House reporter Sarah Kellogg, and politics correspondent Jason Rosenbaum supplied context for what's brought certain issues before voters and how neighboring states have handled similar issues in the past. They also answered audience questions and shared expertise on local and statewide ballot measures. That includes how those measures made it to the polls to begin with. Here's Alex.
So let's start with Proposition M, and this is in the city of St. Louis. I want to start with you, Rachel. If approved by the St. Louis city voters, it would modernize and degender the language in the city charter. Tell us more about this and how it came about.
This came about as part of legislation that the Board of Aldermen put on the ballot. And essentially what supporters are saying is if we want to make major reworks to the city charter, the foundation needs to be good. So it does things like change the language to gender neutral. Instead of saying for the mayor, he, it says the mayor. And it standardizes the way that numbers are written out across the charter. And it also eliminates references to obsolete state laws, obsolete city ordinances, and obsolete city departments. For example, the city no longer operates public hospitals, so there's no need to have a public hospital board. So it is very much a clean up charter change where the sponsors say if you want to do additional work, you have to have a good foundation. As the sponsor put it, charter was built in 1914. It's an old house. You've got to get foundation work done. As the owner of an old house, I know that.
You mentioned one of the provisions is to change references of he as it refers to the mayor to just mayor. But St. Louis, as we know, has already had 3 women who have been mayors. So what's the point?
The point is just simply that they want to make sure the language accurately reflects the reality of the city. The mayor is no longer, as Alex mentioned, just going to be male. We've had 3 female mayors in a row. So they want to make sure that it reflects the reality of the situation and the reality going forward.
Also, how are aldermen, alderwomen, how are they going to be referred to officially in the charter?
That's a good question. I didn't look to see whether it becomes I think it's alderperson, that they changed it to alderperson. So a gender neutral term for it. I prefer alderfolk, but I didn't write the law.
For a time, there was just discussion to have it be alder, I know.
Yes, but I've also heard that is has to do with a tree. So they didn't want to think that alder tree people. Yeah.
I mean, there are many street names in St. Louis named after trees.
There are many street names named after trees. I think we're on one right now.
Yes, we are. It is for a charter in the city, for changes to the charter, what is the vote that is required?
60%. So in order for this to take percent, it would have to receive 60%.
Why is that the case as opposed to just a simple majority?
That's what they wrote into the charter.
Okay.
So if they wanted to change the amount to change the charter, they'd have to change the charter.
Okay. Well, that's a pretty simple Proposition M, but we did want to make sure to get to that in the city. The next one, we're going to stay with Rachel and talk about Proposition U. This is the letter U, not Y-O-U. This is in St. Louis County. Rachel, what would Proposition U do?
Proposition U basically puts into effect a sales tax, for lack of a better way to put it, on online purchases. It is called U for use tax. People may remember back in 2018 that the Supreme Court said you could level taxes on online purchases from Wayfair, Amazon, etc. And what this is asking voters in St. Louis County to do is to allow St. Louis County to levy about a 3.5% tax on online purchases. And it would basically add that on top of local or other taxes that are being charged on online purchases. And this is an or. You don't pay sales and use tax. It's an or. So if you bought a pair of shoes online, you would pay the use tax. If you happen to stop by, your favorite running store in St. Louis County and buy those shoes in person, you would pay the sales tax. You would pay the same amount of sales as use tax. It just depends whether you buy it in person or online.
And this is a tax that is already paid by St. Louis City residents. They
That's
have
correct.
A use tax.
St. Louis City has got its voters to approve a use tax. And use taxes aren't new things. They've been around for, won't say forever, but for an extended period of time. What is new now is that because they can be applied to online sales, and online sales are such a big part of purchasing power now, or purchasing done by people, counties, municipalities, states, etc., they want to get in on the fun. And this would be St. Louis County saying, we want in on the fun and we're going to levy a use tax.
I read that it's hard to estimate how much this would bring in. I've seen estimates anywhere from $90 million to $110 million annually. But who supports this tax?
The campaign is being run by the Municipal League and the St. Louis Realtors. And the municipalities want it because the way that the tax would be distributed, it would benefit their members. So the tax in the city would be distributed to municipalities by the percentage of their population as compared to the population of the county as a whole. So if you have like a city that is 8% of the county's population, you would receive 8% of some of the pool of the revenue. And it'll go to other places too, parks, the zoo, public safety. It basically is distributed in the same way that sales tax revenue is distributed.
County residents voted on this in 2022. How did it do, Rachel?
It did not pass. But what the Municipal League has told me is that it can take multiple votes, even when local governments want to put a use tax in place. It can take multiple votes for it to get approved. So they're hoping that this time they realize, hey, this is a good idea. And, you should pay taxes on online purchases.
The Municipal League was also making an argument about fairness. Can you detail that a little bit?
The idea is it's sort of thinking back to 2002 when online sales were starting to become more and more of a thing, that you're not paying taxes if you buy something online, but you would be paying if you went to a brick and mortar retailer. And the idea was to create fairness between the brick and mortar retailer and the online retailer, that they didn't want it to be automatically cheaper to go online. So your consideration was, I pay less by going online, but I might go and support my local retail establishment. I think that's less now. I think a lot more people do online sales or online delivery because it is convenient. But that is the argument that they're making, is we need to level the playing field when it comes to taxes.
Jason, I have a question for you on this. You've covered the county budget woes from time to time. Rachel just talked about the fairness issue, but it seems to me that maybe it's just an issue of the county budget woes. What do you make of that?
Oh, it absolutely is. The county has been kind of in this financial death spiral for 15, 20 years now, in that they have been basically taking money from reserves and using that to balance the budget. One question I had was, how did they get such enormous reserves that have lasted for almost 15 or 20 years? And part of it, I think, is because of COVID. COVID helped prevent the reserves from being depleted. But they're really going to run out of money probably in, I don't know, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years. So the use tax is pretty critical to preventing just catastrophic budget cuts. And I know we're not talking about the county executive race, and this is a backdoor way of me saying something about the county executive race.
Please go ahead, Jason.
Without the use tax, whoever wins that is probably going to wish they were not county executive.
Is there opposition to this, Rachel?
There is nothing organized, in the sense that there is no group that has formed a campaign specifically against it. There are some politicians who, if they are asked, will express their opposition to it, or who use it as part of their campaign. But there is not an organized anti-Prop U campaign.
One of the things I wondered, and I know we're not talking about the potential reunification of the city and the county, but I'm going to indulge a little bit, just as Jason did, is that I wonder if this fails to pass, whether that could potentially make the argument stronger for county residents saying, hey, maybe we need to join forces. What do you think of that, Jason?
I don't know how exactly that would work because the county would be taking in the city as a municipality. So it wouldn't be like St. Louis County would be merging with St. Louis city government. And I don't think that we would, I say we, I am a county resident, so that was not a slip. I don't know if St. Louis County would just adopt what the city has in terms. I mean, certainly the county would not have an earnings tax if the county or the city became part of the county. So I don't know the exact answer of that, but I don't know if that's a good reason to merge the two. There are probably a lot of other.
And it's not like the city is necessarily in better budget shape than the county. They're at least solvent. They have to be solvent. They don't like to spend their reserves on one time, but the city is also looking at questionable budget numbers going ahead. So this isn't, like, oh my gosh, it's a growing municipality versus a not growing municipality.
The cities might have one state senator by 2027 because of population loss. So.
And I can't imagine the city would ever want to give up the tax that city residents have already put in on themselves.
I mean, I don't think that they would give up the revenue that they've raised. They possibly would no longer need the earnings tax, but I can't imagine that they wouldn't charge it.
Well, right now they absolutely do need it because they don't have a plan if it were not to be renewed.
Oh,
so it's not something where they could
correct,
even have.
Correct, yes. I mean, they do vote on it every 5 years, and it would phase out over time. It doesn't just cut off if they reject it, but they haven't rejected it yet. So
we have a question from Diane from Rock Hill. Thank you, Diane, for being the first person to fill out your question card and to hand it in. Woo! Yes, thank you, Diane. And this would be some clarification from you, Rachel. Diane asks, is the online sales use tax added on to the municipality tax, or will this be added to the yearly tax that we already pay?
So this is at the time of sale. So when you order a pair of shoes or, that dress you have to have from Temu or Shein or pick your online retailer, it gets added at that point. It is not at the end of the year where you pay like property or income tax or those. It is essentially, for lack of a better way to explain it, a sales tax on online goods. It's just in state law, sales and use are distinct to having a physical presence in the state versus not having a physical presence in the state. It's the same amount that is charged in sales tax on a product. You don't get charged both. You either get charged the sales or the use. They're charged at the same level at the same time.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Rachel. And we don't know if this will pass on the August 4th ballot, but if you want to make a big purchase and you live in the county, do it before this tax goes into effect.
Big online purchase, Alex.
Yes, to save 3.5%. Okay, so we're going to jump to one of the statewide issues now. We're going to talk about Amendment 1. And Jason, you have covered Amendment 1. Tell us about it. What would it do?
Amendment 1 would renew a 1/10 of 1 cent or 1% sales tax, where the revenue goes half to soil and water conservation projects and the other half to Missouri state parks. There are a lot of hotly contested ballot items, both in the county and the city. I don't really think that city ballot item is really hotly
quite
contested.
Literally no opposition to it that I know of.
I think I want to delete that comment from myself. And we'll be talking about the state soon. There is really no organized opposition to Amendment 1. The Farm Bureau has endorsed it. The Sierra Club has endorsed it. Those two entities do not like each other, and the fact that they have joined forces just shows how popular this is. And part of it is because soil and water conservation is really important for Missouri agriculture. I actually was talking with Garrett Hawkins about some other states that have dealt with some really latent water problems, particularly Iowa. I think Iowa's water is so contaminated, people are getting sick now.
Well, I used to work in Iowa, and there's a lot of agricultural runoff from the chemicals that are put on farm fields, and it is a big issue there. So
yes,
correct.
And also in Kansas too. I read an article about how there's so much like fertilizer in water that I guess you don't have to fertilize anymore. I'm not 100% sure on this. As you can tell, like I'm not an agriculture expert, but I am a state parks expert. And I think that's the part that is more generally beloved by the public in Missouri. State parks, I think, probably have a 95% approval rating in Missouri. I say 95 because there have been instances where state parks get established and there's some controversy over that. So I don't want to say that they're always popular. But given that they are in every part of the state, they're really big tourism draws for the surrounding communities, and they just incentivize an appreciation for nature, an appreciation for exercise, an appreciation for just mindfulness and relaxation. I think that people are really happy that this tax does things like allow people to get into these parks for free, which is not the case in other states. So.
Well, and in fact, it is the case in most states that you cannot get into the state park for free. But in Missouri and Illinois, we're blessed to have free entry into state parks. But I recall visiting my brother in Colorado a few years ago, and you have to pay a vehicle fee there. They build it into their yearly registration of vehicles, so you have to have a tag on your vehicle, or not you have to pay a single entry fee. But go on, Jason.
Yeah, and you don't have to do that in Missouri. I'm not saying that every single thing in the Missouri State Park is free. Like I went to a restaurant, they don't give you free food there. You do have to pay. And there are probably some other things too.
Some of the other amenities, probably camping, if you're renting boats.
But
yeah,
one of the things that the head of the Missouri Parks Association told me, in other states you have to pay to shower in some of these parks, and you do not have to do that because of the parks tax. Now, these are things that people in Missouri probably would take for granted because they're just so used to having those things for free, but those things cost money to maintain, and having that tax there is a huge help towards doing just basic maintenance on the parks. So as you could kind of tell, like this was drawn up, I think 42 years ago. It's been put on the ballot multiple times. It has never come close to failing. The interesting thing about it this year, as we'll kind of talk about with Amendment 4 and 5, is there is a little bit of fear that the percentage may not be as high because people may be just going into the ballot box and voting no on everything, which is why there is probably a more concerted yes campaign for Amendment 1 than usual. The last time this was on the ballot was in 2016, and I don't really remember there being any campaign to speak of. I don't think the proponents of Amendment 1 are taking anything for granted because this tax is just so important both to the agricultural community and to people who work at and appreciate state parks.
Well, it's also not the only amendment on the ballot that has the word tax in it. And so there's maybe some concern of some confusion between Amendment 5, which we will talk about, I'm sure, shortly, but also Amendment 1.
Just some specifics about Amendment 1. It raises about $140 million annually. And Jason, you said state parks, which is correct. There are 57 of them in Missouri, but it would also help fund 36 historic sites. Mm-hmm. And, of course, we've been talking about free entry, which includes my favorite one to say, which is Ha Ha Tonka State Park when I go annually to Lake of the Ozarks. I'm curious, what are all of your favorite state parks? Jason, then Rachel, then Sarah.
My favorite state park is Hahn State Park in St. Genevieve, Missouri.
I am going to throw a curveball out here. I'm going to say Arrow Rock, say that 5 times fast, State Historic Site outside of Columbia, Missouri. It's one of the oldest settlements, and it's just a really kind of fun place to go, walk around, hang out if you're nerd out to history.
So I live in Columbia, so I'm a big fan of Rockbridge State Park, but also I love my parks to also be water parks, so I'm a big Johnson Shut-ins person too.
Have you been to Castor River?
No, I need to do that.
The pink ones?
Yeah.
Rachel, can you say Arrow Rock 5 times fast?
I mean, sure.
We have a question from Mike from Sunset Hills. Mike wants to know, why is Amendment 1 even an amendment rather than just a law?
So that's a good question. When it was created in 1984, it was coming off, I don't know how long the period of time was before the tax that funds the Conservation Department came around. But the Conservation Department is a lot more controversial than the Missouri State Park system for various reasons I don't really need to get into, but it really has a lot to do with the fact that it's a permanent sales tax that goes into the Conservation Department, and the legislature has no ability to do anything with it. So if there's some sort of problem in some sort of conservation area, and people go to their legislator saying, I can't do activity X in conservation area Y, the legislator could go to the Conservation Commission. The Conservation Commission doesn't really have to listen to the legislature because they don't depend on them for their money. So the reason I mention all of this is when we're just going to keep calling this Amendment 1 because calling it the State Parks and Soil and Water Conservation Tax is a little wordy. I think it came after that, and the idea was that we're putting this in the Constitution, but it's not going to be permanent, and you're going to have to renew it every 10 years. So it doesn't have the same feeling of unaccountability of the Conservation Department. And I understand unaccountability is a pejorative, and I think there are probably some good reasons why the Conservation Department isn't dependent on the legislature. But I think that was why it's in the Constitution, and there has to be a vote every 10 years, as opposed to this being a statutory tax. A lot of taxes have to be through the Constitution because the legislature is very limited to the taxes that they can raise in a certain given time without going to the vote of the people.
And just to be clear, the amendments that we're talking about, what kind of vote do they require to pass?
They need 50% plus one.
And before we move on from Amendment 1, I found a nugget of info in my research for tonight that I thought I'd share with you, is that in 1972, for about 2 months, Missouri was facing a situation in which a tax to fund state parks had expired. So they started to do a permitting process for vehicles, but it was wildly unpopular, and it lasted, as I said, for just 2 months. So I don't know what happened in 1972. I don't know if there were riots at state park gates or what was the case. But I wanted to share that before we move on
I'm
to...
surprised they were able to get a permitting process set up in 2 months. Pretty quick.
Well, it probably took much longer, but the permit process only lasted for 2 months.
Yeah, that seemed like a terrible idea.
Yeah. Even though most states do that kind of thing.
They're spoiled in Missouri.
Yeah.
That was St. Louis on the Air executive producer Alex Heuer in conversation with St. Louis Public Radio's Rachel Lippmann, Sarah Kellogg, and Jason Rosenbaum in front of a live audience at our recent voter guide event. We need to take a quick break, but we'll be right back to continue this special voter guide edition of our show with information about Missouri's Amendment 5 and St. Louis County's Proposition C. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from Gemma, architects, planners, and designers seeking to bring joy to their clients and communities. Details at gemastl.com.
Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. Let's return to today's in-person version of STLPR's Voter Guide, a conversation with STLPR State House reporter Sarah Kellogg, Justice reporter Rachel Lippmann, and politics correspondent Jason Rosenbaum, and a live audience that unpacked local and statewide amendments and propositions that voters will see next week on the August 4th primary ballot. St. Louis on the Air executive producer Alex Heuer moderated that discussion. Here's Alex.
Let's move on to Amendment 5, and I'm going to turn to Sarah for this one. In brief, this allows lawmakers to expand sales and use taxes for the purpose of eliminating the individual income tax. Sarah,
Yes.
Before tonight's event, you talked about how it's really key to talk about how it allows lawmakers to do this.
Because when you're going to be basically going up to vote on this, it's giving lawmakers the ability. There's no set plan yet. And so what this basically does is gives lawmakers the ability to expand sales and use taxes in the state for the purpose of eliminating the income tax. So there is no, you could think people can say all in all what this will or won't do. There is no set plan yet, and there wouldn't be unless this were to pass.
One of the things is that the amendment says that reduce the state individual income tax based on revenue growth until the tax is eliminated.
Yes.
But how do we determine when there's been enough growth in revenue?
Well, I mean, in theory, there would be a scale system set up. So the way that Missouri's income tax cut that was passed a couple years ago works is if there's a certain revenue marker hit with GR, then they would trigger a tax cut, basically a lowering of the tax rate. And so I know that if the legislature were to do this, they would rely on kind of this incremental versus doing it all at once, because that would require a much larger, increase to basically make up for that revenue. So it wouldn't be done all at once is kind of how it depends on how the state is doing.
And it's a 5-year process, right?
Yes. So through an amendment that was placed in the Senate, because initially the first version of this amendment was automatic. So it was an entire process of if lawmakers did nothing, eventually it would still lower to an eventual 0. That would take a long time, but that would eventually do that. Well, through Senate negotiations, that automatic part was taken out. And so now it has to be done by lawmakers in order for it to go into effect. And they would only have 5 years to do it.
So is this something that had to go to voters in the first place?
Partially. So lawmakers could decide, I want to do a special session and go to Jefferson City tomorrow and eliminate the income tax. And they could do that. They do not need the permission from voters to lower taxes, to eliminate taxes. That's why they were able to do that income tax cut back in 2022. What they need voter permission for is the ability to expand sales and use taxes of what would be taxed either sales or through use. So that's what they need voter permission for.
And that's a great segue into how the revenue would be replaced. You said sales and use taxes. Can you tell more about that?
Well, I mean, that's part of the question, right? In theory, that is the expansion that would make up for the revenue, because the income tax makes over $8 billion of Missouri's revenue. That's well over half. So in order for the state to basically make up that money, there would have to be a raising of sales taxes, a raising of use taxes. But the question of what would be taxed or what that would look like is not clear, because that's not in the amendment. And so that is something that lawmakers would have to figure out if they were to give that ability.
Jason, I can't remember if you did a story on this or we were just talking about it one day in the office, but talking about how some other states raise their revenue and talking about examples of states that don't have the individual income tax, like Florida, Texas, Alaska.
I wonder what is different about those states.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'll jump in here. So my mom lives in Florida, for instance, and I would not want to live in Florida. It's much too humid in the summer, which I know is crazy because it's humid here. But it's even
also have hurricanes.
It's worse, and there's hurricanes. But Florida has a huge agriculture economy. It has world-class tourism.
Disney World.
It has Disney World. It has beaches.
And Universal Studios.
Too.
Most importantly, it has lots of people that have second homes in Florida who don't actually live there. So property taxes, I think, are there's an attempt to try to get rid of property taxes in Florida, which I'm sure is who knows how they'll vote on that. They probably will vote to have no property taxes the way things are going in Florida. But my point is, Florida has other things to make up that revenue, and places like Nevada has gambling. Alaska has oil. Texas not only has oil, it has a gigantic mining and agriculture and business sector. Like, my sister lives in Dallas. I went and visited there. I went to probably the most opulent mall I've ever seen, and it was just full of fancy rich people, basically. There are other reasons people are coming to Texas besides the lack of an income tax, but they are able to. These other states have other things that make it so they don't need it. And I also will just add, there are a few other states that don't have income taxes, like South Dakota and New Hampshire, but those states are also very small in terms of population. And New Hampshire is obviously small in terms of size. South Dakota is obviously a lot larger. But I would say the closest comparable one to Missouri is Tennessee.
Yeah, Missouri lawmakers talked about Tennessee a lot when they were talking about the passage of this resolution as it was going through the state house, saying that's the most comparable. But I would argue that Tennessee has greater tourism. It has Nashville and it has Memphis, and it has a higher sales tax and property tax.
And it is growing.
And so, and so it's all of those, as they say, most comparable is Tennessee, but even then it's debatable whether or not how comparable that is.
So who supports Amendment 5?
Well, Governor Mike Kehoe obviously spearheaded that. We had heard basically rumors that his plan was to eliminate the income tax before we realized it was going to go to voters, because we were all wondering what that was going to look like before it
State of state. We're all of a sudden like, wait, this feels like news.
Yes. And it was like, oh, voters are deciding whether or not this can happen. So obviously it has the support of Governor Mike Kehoe, as well as many Republicans within the legislature, though not all. And then as well as organizations that are just kind of advocating for fewer taxes in general. I don't think, they find a tax that they like. So they're also a big fan of eliminating the income tax.
And one of the arguments that Governor Kehoe makes is that it would make Missouri more competitive. What does he mean by that?
Yeah, so that is the argument that I've seen the most, is that Missouri is stagnating when it comes to growth. People are leaving to Missouri to other states like Tennessee, and other surrounding states.
And bars just moved there last week.
Yeah, and so there's a question of what can Missouri do to get people to either stay or come to Missouri. And so I think for them, one way would be to not have an income tax, which would either encourage people to move to Missouri or for people to conduct their businesses in Missouri. So for them, it's kind of about growth and having Missouri be a little more sustainable, is what I've kind of seen of right now. Missouri is losing population. What can we do to keep it? And this has been floated as an idea.
What about opposition?
So the Missouri Realtors Association has given not money only against 5, but also 4, which we'll talk about. And then a lot of Democrats within the legislature, as well as just many organizations. Missouri Budget Project has talked about how they are assessing it and saying that it is just going to be, in theory, just a tax increase for Missourians. So plenty of organizations that are vocalizing their opposition to it. For the most part.
Big business groups come out against it too.
The associated industry.
Yeah,
Right.
and then also Missouri Chamber of Commerce is pretty neutral on it. They haven't. I know when they spoke on it, it was more for informational purposes only than it was for or against.
That's
And
unusual.
AARP.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. How could I forget? AARP super against this because seniors do not pay an income tax, and they also don't pay taxes on Social Security. So they don't see that. They would not benefit from the elimination of the income tax, but they would see a change if sales taxes were to go up.
When I was going to bring up AARP, so thank you for
I appreciate that.
bringing that up. Who would this tax, other than people who are older, who would it disproportionately affect?
Well, I mean, for the nature of sales and use taxes, it would just disproportionately affect lower income people. Because if you're looking at an income tax, well, obviously, in theory, that should be proportional to how much you make. There's a standard deduction, and so you should be charged a proportional amount of what your income does. Well, a sales tax is a flat tax. So if someone is getting charged, an extra 10% on, a washing machine repair, well, if that's the same flat rate for everyone, well, that's going to be more out of someone who makes less money's pocket. And so ultimately it is a regressive tax because it is the same rate for everybody, which means it would affect people unproportionally.
And could also, if they do expand it to services, which is, I know, something they're eyeing, thinking about, that could be a haircut, that could be medical care.
That could be, veterinary care.
Yeah.
If your cat gets sick, it could be medication. There isn't clarity on what that is yet, which is, again, I think one of the uphill climbs that supporters have of this amendment if they want it done. Well, people have questions. What's the percentage going to be? How much is going to be increased? What's going to be taxed? Are there going to be exemptions? There aren't answers to that yet because there is not a specific plan, and we will not see that in this amendment.
And Jason, one of the things you've talked about before is the lobbying effort that would take hold if this passes.
Yes, like for instance, my wife and I recently redid our will because the first time we did our will, we had 1 child and now we have 3. And to redo a will and to also set up things like trusts for our kids cost us about $2,000. There's no sales tax on that because it's a service. It's not a product. I guess technically a will is a product because you get paper, but it's really not. It's a service. So
the will is the end product of the service.
So my point for bringing that up is if there was sales tax on a $2,000 will in St. Louis County, that would be an extra $200, which to, somebody, as Sarah mentioned, who is middle to high income is not a big deal. But if somebody is middle to working class or poor and they need legal services for some reason, that does end up probably do things like say, well, it's going to cost me $200 or $300 extra to do a will. Maybe I won't do a will.
Yeah.
And
we've heard lots of,
even if you need like a criminal defense attorney too.
And we've heard lots of discussion about exemptions. I think Kehoe's mentioned agriculture being an area that wouldn't see that. Gasoline has been an area that hasn't seen that. Well, one, that isn't set in stone yet, so they can say that, but it's not guaranteed. Yeah. And also, there's only so many industries you can exempt until the price skyrockets.
Now,
and so it's either going to be a lot of things are going to see an increase of taxes with fewer exemptions, or there'll be more exemptions, and some things will just be taxed more.
So I actually, when I brought up this example of the will to somebody who is supporting Amendment 5, they argued that because these companies would not be paying income tax anymore, then naturally the price of the will would go down.
Because borne out in tax.
I mean,
so I'm a little skeptical that they're just going to cut the price of a will that they usually would have done for $2,000 to $1,700 because of they don't have an income tax. But I'm just the messenger here, people. I'm not saying that's going to happen.
I'm not sure if you look to the history of tax policy or corporate policy in the history of America that we have ever seen promised tax cuts necessarily lead to investments or prices coming down.
Yeah, I would argue there's a lot of goodwill being applied to like the best case scenarios for the changes of that. And again, we don't know how businesses are going to react to it. We don't even know what it's going to look like yet.
We had a couple people asking questions about the state of Kansas when they tried something similar. Michael in University City and Deborah here in the city of St. Louis are asking about Kansas, wondering how it's different and why would we go this route when it went so poorly in Kansas?
Well, with Brownback, and correct me if I'm wrong, that was all at once, right? Okay, so that first thing, it was all at once. So it's like, let's just eliminate the income tax tomorrow and then basically deal with that. So that's one of the main differences is that was all at once. Missouri's would be more gradual with a plan to replace it. But the other difference, and I think is if they decide to eliminate the income tax and then decide, this wasn't a good idea for Missouri, they would need voter approval to turn that around. That's a lot harder than it was in Kansas, where they could say, never mind, we take taxis. We actually didn't want to do that. It would be a heavier lift to change that in Missouri.
Yeah.
If it was a decision of, never mind, this wasn't a good idea.
Like, there are a lot of negatives to the idea of a legislature being able to raise taxes without a statewide vote. Frankly, Illinois does that all the time. And I think the real reason my parents moved to Florida was my mom wanted to be closer to her parents. But they did cite the fact that taxes in Illinois, especially property taxes, were really high. And the Illinois legislature can just pass whatever tax increases they want, and they don't have to go to a statewide vote. I think there's good reason why there should be statewide votes on tax increases, because there has to be a campaign and buy-in from the citizenry. But the downside is if you cut taxes, as Sarah mentioned, it is extraordinarily difficult to reverse that. So it's really not comparable to Kansas in that way.
And you could run into a scenario where things would have to get bad enough in the state for it to almost be inevitable that people are like, we need more money. And is that a chance that you want to take, that it turns into a Kansas situation to motivate people to go and replace the tax or increase the tax or put an income tax back in place?
Sarah, what happens if 5 years goes, we get to the end of 5 years and nothing has been done, or it's only kind of halvesies?
That's a good question. I would assume from reading that with only that 5-year limit means that they can't do anything again, and there would have to be another vote to authorize an additional 5 years or however long. But pretty much if it's not done in 5 years, I don't think it happens. I think there was a reason why that time limit was put on. That was kind of a Democrat compromise when it came back from the Senate, was putting that time limit on, so they didn't have unlimited time to do that, because either it happens or it doesn't then, and you can't really prolong the issue. But that's a good question. that I think that's the answer, but
do something or get off the pot, basically.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, that was, again, making it so lawmakers had to do it and giving the time limit were big changes that the Senate made.
Not just, we're going to propose to do this and say we did something and not actually follow through.
Yeah.
We talked about how this would be based on revenue growth. Mike from Creve Coeur wants to know if revenues go down, would the income tax go back up?
That would, that I don't know the answer to. I will say I think it would be a gradual cut. That's not how it works now, right? With the current income tax changes.
My understanding is there have been a number of income tax
the triggers.
Yeah, there's been a number of income taxes cuts passed over the last, decade or so.
Last big one was in 22.
Yeah, and a lot of them to go down requires revenue growth in order to take it like a 0.1% down. I don't really think we're in revenue growth right now, so I don't think those taxes are going down anytime soon.
I also think they don't go up. I think it's the trigger hits.
They don't go up.
Hits that. So I don't think it would go back up. But again, that's kind of to be seen on what the plan would look like. I feel awful that I really can't answer some of these questions, but that's just kind of the nature of what the amendment is.
Based off everything I know about the Missouri income tax, it will not automatically go up if revenue goes down. You would have to have another statewide vote to raise the income tax rate.
Michael from University City also asked, why eliminate income tax given how low it is? And I don't know the answer to that, but I did look up before tonight that Missouri has a graduated income tax with rates that range from 2% to 4.7%. I don't know how that relates to other states, but does anybody on our panel know why this is an option if Missouri has a relatively low income tax?
That is a very good question. I think that if you were to poll most Missourians of what tax they would like to see cut, the income tax is probably not going to be there because people don't think about it. Because you pay it at the end of the year. I would say property taxes is especially one,
property taxes.
But as well as property. I mean, that's an issue that this year the legislature had a pretty big push to do something with property taxes, to do property tax relief. There's something, I'm going to get a little nerdy. It's called siloing, but it's when you assess the classes of property differently, where each basically, the way that Missouri, it's called the Hancock Amendment. I'm sure a lot of you know what it is, but basically if you hit a point where the state is going to, in theory, be making revenue, you would get a tax reduction. And that's how Hancock works in a very, very, very simplified nutshell. The way that the state was currently classifying these properties is one, like either residential or commercial. If they hit that threshold, they will ultimately be paying more. There was a push to silo these, which St. Louis County already does this, but it was a push to, in theory, provide property tax relief by requiring these classifications to be siloed, separated, so that they hit their own limit and then get the rewards. That's a very convoluted way of saying that there was a really big push to do property tax relief the year that didn't happen. It's interesting that the income tax is been the target this year, because obviously there's been income tax cuts, but this was the first year I really heard for a push for an elimination versus personal property or property. I think the claim is that this is just something that would enable Missourians to spend more of their money the way that they want it versus going towards a tax.
Well, and part of Amendment 5, we've been talking about the individual income tax, but part of Amendment 5 is also when local revenues increase, municipalities would have to reduce personal property and other local taxes, but prohibit reducing funding for public schools. And Barb from St. Louis County asked, property tax, how is this part of it? Eliminating property tax, is that correct?
So that's what they're saying, is the money that you would in theory save by eliminating the income tax would then go towards reduce other taxes and like locality. So personal property or property taxes. You mentioned the carve out to make sure that schools weren't affected. Well, that's local dollars. That actually doesn't mean state dollars. So there could be an instance where schools actually are affected because it's the state dollars that they didn't really talk about. They mentioned really local dollars can't be affected. So, obviously that does make a lot of school funding is those local tax dollars, but it isn't all of it.
So correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, but the theory behind this is if you expand sales taxes to a bunch of services, then you would also have local sales taxes attached to those state sales taxes. So the idea is that would bring cities and counties a tremendous amount of revenue.
And those municipalities wouldn't be able to make a profit, more or less. So they're kind of treating it as a mini Hancock Amendment. So then the money that would be above them making a profit would then go back towards reducing personal property or property.
That's what I thought.
Yep.
And you talked about
Thanks for clarifying.
schools. Yes, thank you. You talked about schools. Donna from Kirkwood wanted to know what would be the impact on public education, but you were talking about the difference between state and local funding?
Well, yeah. So obviously the local tax dollars, there is a portion of that amendment that said that local tax dollars would not affect schools. So if you had to reduce property tax, if you have this windfall from sales taxes and you have to reduce, personal property taxes to make up for it, that wouldn't be allowed to affect schools. Well, that's local tax dollars. And so they actually don't say anything, at least that particular portion doesn't say anything about state taxes. And so obviously the state gives money to schools as well, and it's unclear how that would affect schools.
Yeah, the local dollars would be held harmless in the sense that the sales tax windfall, I suppose, could be used to backstop the schools, but they don't mention anything about the state being held harmless if it loses general revenue.
Yeah. Okay, I want to move on now to Proposition C, and this is in St. Louis County. Rachel, what would this do?
Excuse me. This is a two-part amendment that sort of fits together, but not really. It adjusts a couple of different time frames. One is for when the county council can pass raises for its elected officials. That would be prosecutor, county executive, and assessor. Right now, you can't pass pay raises later than 10 months before an election. So, for example, if the county council had wanted to give Sam Page, Jake Zimmerman, Melissa Price Smith raises, they would have had to approve it before roughly February 8th, 9th, 10th, which would have been 10 months before the general election. What the one part of Proposition C would do is to expand that time frame to any time before the term of the elected official begins, regardless of when the election is. So, conceivably, the county council could approve a pay raise for the next county executive, the next county assessor, and the next county prosecutor before their terms all begin in January. The second part of Proposition C also moves all of the inauguration dates to the same day. Right now, the county council and the county-wide offices are sworn in on 2 different days. No, I don't know why. I don't know how that ended up getting slightly messed up, but it moves them all to the same date, and I believe it is the first Tuesday in January. It would now be the inauguration dates for the county council, county executive, county prosecutor, and county assessor if Proposition C passes.
And I was a little confused on Prop C. You talked about raises for assessor, for the executive, but is there something specific about the county executive's pay that includes something about Prop C?
No, it's not directly connected to, they still could not be increased in the term of the individual. So once the new county executive is elected and takes office in January of 2027, his or hers could not go up while they are in that term of office. So the next time they would be able to potentially get a pay raise would be 2031, would be the next time that a pay raise would be able to take effect.
There was not unanimous consent on the county council to approve this. I think rarely is there ever unanimous consent on the county council.
It happens actually surprisingly more often than you would think, but...
Fair. But who supported this?
This was supported by everybody but Lisa Clancy. She is the council member for the 5th District, and she's a Maplewood resident. Her argument was basically that having the 10-month buffer between an election and when a pay increase takes effect takes any of the politics, or removes more of the politics from the equation. It basically means that you're not attempting to reward a person who you like being in office by giving them a raise. Let's say, hypothetically, for example, you really, 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 really like the person who has become county executive, and you say you want to give them more money. This can now be passed after you know who the next county executive is. Whereas if you had to do it 10 months before the election, you're not going to know who the next county executive is. You may know who it isn't, Like if somebody has said, I'm not running again, you would know that they wouldn't get the raise, but you wouldn't know who could get the raise. And she just said having that buffer takes politics somewhat out of the equation.
So I looked up the exact ballot language for all of our issues tonight, as I did with Proposition C, and I'm going to just read this paragraph of what the actual ballot is going to say. It says, shall sections 2.1801 and 3.020, 5.050, and 6.060 of the Charter of St. Louis County be amended to bring the section in compliance with the Missouri Constitution, Article 7, Section 13, and to correct an error on the date a term in office ends, as set forth in Exhibit A of Ordinance Number 29591, on file with the St. Louis County Administrative Director and the St. Louis County Board of Election Commissioners.
Well done.
So if I am seeing that on the ballot, I have no idea what it actually does or anything that you just talked about, Rachel.
That is true. So those second, third, and fourth numbers are the section of the county charter that deals with the inauguration dates. So that is for and I'm not going to get the order correct. I think it's county executive, county prosecutor, county assessor. It just syncs up those dates. Why the ballot language is like that, I don't know.
That's crazy.
It is insane. It is insane. It does not actually tell you what it is going to do. You have to do some research to it to figure that out.
I mean, I think about how many times the ballot language is sued over.
Yes.
And for statewide and the legislature. Oh my gosh. Like, at least in theory, they know what that does. That's wild.
Yeah. I'm no offense to people who are really into this initiative. I don't know if that is worth suing over the ballot.
Yeah, no.
Right.
Which is probably why it's incomprehensible, basically.
Right. They just sort of put it out there. It states what it will do legally. It doesn't tell you what it does. It doesn't explain what it does, but it does tell you legally what it does.
And I looked at the rest of the ballot because I was like, maybe there's like attachments. And it's like, no, it's like, can you go to a poll worker and say, can I please have a copy of Missouri Constitution, Article 7, Section 13? Anyway, I digress. Any thoughts on how this gobbledygook, how voters might vote on it?
No idea. Okay. It depends whether people are sort of, okay, yeah, I'll vote yes on this just because it's there, or I vote no, or I just don't vote at all because I don't know. I have no idea how to handicap this one.
I will just point this out. I don't know how much the assessor, prosecutor, and county executive make.
It is under 100,000, I think, for certainly the county executive and the county assessor.
No, it's more than 100,000.
Is it more than? I think it's less for one of them.
Well,
regardless, it is probably less than you think they make.
Yeah,
but
so those are all full-time jobs. The county council, up until pretty recently, they made $20,000 a year, which I get it. This is St. Louis. Elliot Davis jumps out of the bush and says, why are you paying this person so much money? You paid for it, blah, 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 blah. I probably shouldn't have said that into a microphone, but honestly...
To be aired later.
Honestly, I honestly, I think that mentality can be really dangerous. And I'm going to tell you why. I think if you keep salaries artificially low for things like managing a county with a billion-dollar budget or something like
budget.
that?
It's 1 million plus people.
Yeah.
You're talking about the number of employees for a Fortune 500 company.
So there does need to be an incentive for people to run for some of these offices, including the countywide offices. I don't think that incentive is as low as the county council. Right now, because they did end up raising the pay of the county council members to $40,000 and $50,000 a year, which I think is probably where it should be, just because a lot of the county council districts have a lot of municipalities in it, and the county council people don't have any real power over it. I'm only just mentioning this to say that, for whatever reason, even though county government in St. Louis County is extremely important, and it can be very powerful, as we saw during COVID, or if you, I don't know, get electrical work done in your house and need to get it inspected, like certain people right here, thanks to a power surge from Ameren. County government's really important, and it affects a lot of people's lives. So I don't think that we should necessarily be flippant about compensation for it. I do think we should be flippant about this initiative because it is just... it's so hard to follow, and I actually do see where Councilwoman Clancy's coming from, where this could just be used as a reward for the allies of the new county executive.
And make your argument for state lawmakers as well. If it's cost prohibitive for people, you're only going to get, the attorneys and a lot of the people or retirees that can afford to take that time off.
Yeah, and just to the record, like I've run into Elliot Davis a number of times and have no problem with them.
Well,
but I do have problems with his mentality that everybody should be paid $0 for governmental work.
And the city of St. Louis just approved doubling the salaries for their board of aldermen. The thinking being that if you can devote your attention to it full time, the work is going to be better. It is essentially a full-time job anyway, with the constituent services element of it. That's more true in the city than it is in the county because of the municipal unincorporated overlay. But you want people, like Sarah said, who can do the work and who don't have to split their attention in 40 different directions, who don't have to be worrying, I've got to go to the job so I can pay the bills so that I can go do this job that isn't really paying my bills.
And the Board of Aldermen was also cut in half, too. So
That's
I think
true.
that helped.
Yes.
And changes to the St. Louis County Charter only require a simple majority. Is that
50
right?
plus 1, correct.
Which is different than the city charter.
That's correct, because the city and the county are different entities.
Okay. We have a comment from Elliot Davis. Jason, like me.
I'm never going to live that down. Sorry, Elliot. I guess I paid for it.
That was St. Louis Public Radio's politics team Jason Rosenbaum, Rachel Lippmann, and Sarah Kellogg in conversation with St. Louis on the Air executive producer Alex Heuer. After a quick break, we'll return to our special in-person voter guide featuring STLPR reporters and community member questions. They'll discuss Amendment 2, which would change how the Jackson County assessor is chosen, and Amendment 4, which would change how initiative petitions would work in Missouri. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Hi, I'm Laura Hamden, and my colleague Jessica Rogan and I are your daily hosts of the Gateway newsletter. We meet with the editors in the STLPR newsroom every weekday to bring you the top local stories of the day in a quick and easy 6-minute read by 6 a.m. In an age of overwhelm, it's a refreshing, thoughtful take on the news day, if we do say so ourselves. Fine-tune your daily news habit with the Gateway newsletter. Subscribe at stlpr.org/gateway.
Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. Let's get back to our in-person voter guide. St. Louis on the Air executive producer Alex Heuer recently moderated a discussion between STLPR politics correspondent Jason Rosenbaum, State House reporter Sarah Kellogg, and Justice reporter Rachel Lippmann before a live audience to unpack local and statewide amendments and propositions on the August 4th primary ballot.
Rachel, let's move to Amendment 2 to the Missouri Constitution that deals primarily with Jackson County. Tell us briefly about this. We won't spend long on it.
This is one that would essentially say all charter counties, which include St. Louis, St. Charles, and Jackson counties, have to elect their assessor rather than having it be an appointed position. Jackson County had an exemption in the Constitution for reasons that I think had to do with when St. Louis County did something similar in 2010, the state senator who sponsored that legislation, who is now one of our U.S. senators, said, I don't want to monkey around in Jackson County. It's not my business. I'm going to carve out an exemption for them in the Constitution. And now it is removing that exemption. Amendment 2 would remove that exemption for Jackson County so that all charter counties, and I think there's 5 of them, it's St. Louis County, St. Charles County, Clay, Platte, and Jackson, would all elect their assessors.
And the specific carve-out, when it was initially passed, was like counties between the population of like 600,000 and 600,000.
Charter counties between with population with 600,000.
So it didn't say Jackson County
No,
by
They
name.
never do. It's all population. I've
Right.
learned to figure out exactly like the over 1 million. That's St. Louis
That's St.
County.
Louis
If
County.
we're talking
City
about
not within a
city, not
county.
within- that's
Yeah.
St. Louis. So you learn to learn the population codes.
Because they can't specifically say the county without, like, name the county without running afoul of special law provisions. If you do it by population, theoretically, other counties could eventually become eligible for this.
Yeah, Wright County might go from 2,000 people to 1 million people one day.
Sure, obviously.
You never know.
Sure. You never know.
Maybe. We'll see.
We'll see. And that kind of gets at not what you just said, Jason, about Wright County, but Michael from Webster Groves wanted to know why do we need an amendment that changes the status of one specific county? And we talked about the carve-out there. And George from the city of St. Louis asks, are Jackson County residents supportive of Amendment 2?
So to take the first question first, the reason they have to is because it is amending the Constitution of the state of Missouri, and that requires a statewide vote. So because the carve-out is in the Constitution and they are eliminating the carve-out, that has to be voted on statewide, even though it really only affects one county. And the answer to the Jackson counties is the Jackson County residents supportive. They already voted to change their charter, so their governing document, to say that their assessor should now be elected as opposed to appointed. This just says that they cannot go back and change that charter in the future. This position is always, unless the state constitution gets amended again, now an elected position in all charter counties in the state of Missouri.
And I found in doing some research that St. Louis County, up until 2010, had an appointed assessor. So that was a change in the not-too-distant past.
The sponsor of that is now U.S. Senator Eric Fitz.
Before we move on to Amendment 4, which is our last issue, I'm going to jump back briefly into Prop C. Rachel, a question. Is there any organized support or opposition to Prop C?
No, this is just one that they put on the ballot because they thought, well, the syncing up the inauguration dates is probably something that they need to do so that the terms of office just all start on the same day. This was just something that the county council decided that they wanted to do. And I think the reason was they got tripped up by this in attempting to approve increases for the county assessor and the county executive. They passed them too late beyond the deadline. They got vetoed. The votes weren't there to override the veto. So I assume we'll see something potentially after the August election to increase the salaries for county executive and assessor. They squeaked prosecutor in close enough to the deadline that Sam Page just didn't really want to bother with it. But
okay, so let's move on to the last issue we're going to talk about tonight, and that is Amendment 4, which is my favorite issue to talk about, and that is, if approved by voters, it would change how initiative petitions can pass in the state. Jason, kick us off with this.
So currently, if you want to get a constitutional amendment passed through the initiative petition process, I don't want to say it's easy. You need millions of dollars. You need lots of signature gatherers. You need an idea that people like. So I just do not agree that the idea is easy to pass a constitutional amendment through the initiative petition process. It is hard because it's very expensive. But let's say you do all those things. What happens then is if you get 50% plus one, a majority statewide vote, it gets adopted into the Constitution. And that's how Missouri has this peculiar situation where all the elected officials are Republicans, but we have legal marijuana, we have legal abortion, we have legal sports betting, we have Medicaid expansion. We
had no, that was a constitutional.
I mean, yeah, medical and recreational marijuana. Yes. You mentioned one, but both of those.
We had at one point a novel state legislative redistricting system that then got overturned through another statewide vote. That was Clean Missouri. So the initiative petition process has been sort of a pressure valve for two different things in Missouri. One is to pass things that are not passing the legislature because they are perceived as too liberal or democratic of issues. I would put abortion legalization and Medicaid expansion in both of those things, although I would say Medicaid expansion did have some Republican support. I would say abortion legalization had some Republican support among Republican voters, none among institutional Republicans.
I would say also on issues that just people have said that they have wanted, the legislature has tried time and time again and just haven't been able to do so, or unwilling. So marijuana and sports betting was a big one.
Those are the two issues where is the legislative inaction problem as opposed to a partisan ideological problem. I reject the idea that like marijuana legalization is a Democratic issue. The fact that Missouri has surpassed Colorado in terms of sales.
Is that right?
Yes.
That's news to me.
It has. Part of that is because we border a lot of very restrictive marijuana states, but the other reason is Republicans like smoking marijuana. They do. Or they like taking gummies. Like, they just like it, okay? I've met some of them. So, okay, I've given you the backdrop of how the initiative petition process works now. I would say that especially in the last decade, Republicans in particular have wanted to make it harder to pass constitutional amendments by more than just a majority vote. There have been a number of iterations of this idea that have floated up to the legislative surface, 60%, 57%, a majority of congressional districts. And
didn't they also want to adjust the signature thresholds too?
There have been so many different versions of this. I will say, to briefly interrupt, Jason, I know that ultimately the goal has been to change the vote, because I know at the time Senate President Pro Tem Caleb Brown even admitted like the signature part is like that is robust and hard. And so it's really more the voting aspect of once it makes it on the ballot, there's disagreement of the 50+1.
So what is on the ballot, and I'm going to be very like overly blunt and candid more than I usually am. There are other things in Amendment 4 besides the Constitution amendments that are put forth by the initiative petition process being harder to pass. There are other things. I'm sorry, they're just really not that important. The really important thing is the fact that if this passes, proposed constitutional amendments that are put on through the initiative petition process would have to pass in 8 out of 8 congressional districts and get a majority vote. This would not apply to constitutional amendments that are put on the ballot by the legislature. That would still only require a 50% plus 1%. Not percent, but
50
votes.
plus 1. 50 plus 1.
So I'm getting a little tongue-tied with all the percent and votes and stuff.
Well, let me jump in here. So 8 of 8 congressional districts, and the legislature put this on the ballot. Sarah, what were the discussions like in the state capitol about this?
Well, I actually have to lob this one over to Jason, because that was done during the second. There was 2 special sessions last year, and one of them was on redistricting as well as the map as well as initiative petition. And Jason fell on the sword and covered it because I was on my honeymoon. So Jason was the one who was covering it.
I covered most of it because Jason was handling redistricting.
Yeah, so. I mean, Rachel and I kind of covered it together. Yeah. And I would say that the reaction to this idea, I mean, it passed, it's on the ballot, but I would say this was not universally well-liked among Republicans. I remember talking with Representative Bill Hardwick, who is a state legislator who represents Fort Leonard Wood. I would say he's pretty conservative on a lot of issues overall. Oh, yeah. He did not like this idea, even though he does not like the fact that it's a 50% plus 1 standard. He basically thinks that 8 out of 8 congressional districts is basically, for all intents and purposes, killing the initiative petition process.
Yeah, and for all the versions, because there was a huge push to do this in the last couple of years, especially ahead of the old Amendment 3, because there was, from Republicans wanting to have Amendment 3 fail by having it have a higher threshold. So there was the, 57%. Yeah. There was the majority of congressional districts. And so I think it's very safe to say this is the most extreme version of that, which would be all 8. Instead of a majority or a 57%.
And again, you could, if you're a supporter of this idea, you might think that we're using a pejorative to castigate this, but it is objectively true that this is the most restrictive plan that has been put forward and is the only plan that is going before the ballot, or going on the ballot. So, I'm sure you're going to ask, Alex, like, who's for this? Like, a lot of Republicans, not only from the legislature, but frankly, there are like a lot of Republican activists who do not like the initiative petition process because they see it as like big money liberal interests kind of hijacking the state and doing things that I guess a lot of Republicans don't like. You could say that the things that the state doesn't like, but I think that's objectively not true, because if these are approved through a statewide vote, the state is saying through a vote that they want these things.
But the counter argument to that is you can get to 50% without necessarily getting support from or broad support from Republicans. You can get Greene, St. Louis, Boone, Jackson,
Clay,
Platt, some of the other Kansas.
But again, the
areas.
argument is that's where the people live.
But here's the thing, though.
That is true. That is true. Land doesn't vote. But
here's where that argument kind of falls flat. You also need St. Charles County. St. Charles County is definitely becoming more competitive for Democrats. You may see some state legislators elected from the Democratic Party. It is not there yet in terms of electing countywide officials. So the idea that St. Charles County is some blue wonderland is just factually inaccurate. Yet it voted for legal marijuana. It voted for legal abortion, like 54% to 46%. Even Jefferson County, which is definitely not Democratic anymore. It is long gone. I think it only rejected the old Amendment 3 very narrowly, which was shocking to me because basically every Jefferson County official I've ever met who've been elected to the legislature, including Democrats, have all been against abortion.
There's definitely been a handful of lawmakers that would not have voted for Amendment 3. They got elected, but Amendment 3 also passed in their district.
So I would say the argument that it I think that argument is not entirely false because you can definitely pass a constitutional amendment without the support of like literally any votes from small rural counties. I do not think you can pass a constitutional amendment without some Republican-leaning counties like St. Charles County and getting better than expected margins in places like Jefferson, Lincoln, Cole,
Greene,
Johnson County, Cass County. All those counties are not blue counties. So
I want to push back, Jason, on one thing you said, that some of the other things in Amendment 4 aren't important. I think where they are most important is the language that people see on the ballot.
Yeah.
There are elements in there that put into the Constitution, and this was actually what in the committee hearings most of the bill sponsors were talking about, was what is affectionately known in Jefferson City as ballot candy, which is just language to sweeten or hide what it is that the measure does. And there are provisions in this Amendment 4 in the initiative petition, which is the bulk of the bill. It's the meat. But what you will see is things like banning contribution from foreign donors, something that is already illegal in the state of Missouri, but they want to put it in the Constitution. And that is going to be the part of the ballot language. So if people don't know what the meat of the measure is, they are consequential because of the ballot language.
Right. When I said they don't matter, they do matter in terms of that. They are not nearly as important or critical.
And it's not the meat of the legislation.
Than raising the threshold.
Well, and the sides are still important to a dish. So I will read what those sides on the amendment are. It says that the plan would require printed constitutional amendments to appear at polling places. You already mentioned make it illegal for foreign nationals to donate to initiative petition campaigns, require a public comment period for proposed amendments, and create penalties for people who fraudulently collect or sign petitions. And I saw the cost estimates on this, and I saw like the Department of Corrections said that it would cost them money, like $20,000 a year or something. So I just thought it might be the penalty to like have people in prison who are violating this.
So you're going to incarcerate like literally one person for ballot fraud? Because I feel like it costs $20,000 to incarcerate.
Actually, probably that. Yeah. So I want to go back to the support for this.
Sure.
And we covered this on the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air in the last edition. And you talked with somebody from the Missouri Farm Bureau.
Yes.
Who supports it. And they said that this is a good thing because rural parts of the state are frankly ignored and we're tired of being ignored. Can you expound on what the Missouri Farm Bureau thinks?
So they feel that, as Rachel kind of mentioned, that if you have in their view, slick ad campaign, you can pass a constitutional amendment without really getting any meaningful support in rural parts of the state. I certainly understand where the Farm Bureau is coming from because they and this is not a constitutional amendment, but they are still probably very angry about what happened in 2010 when the Humane Society came in and put very restrictive regulations on dog breeding operations. I don't call it puppy mills because puppy mills are absolutely a pejorative, and there are some definitely scrupulous dog breeders that are not puppy mills. It would have gone to basically all dog breeding operations. And so I think that sort of soured their view on that, just because I'm sure they had a lot of people in the Farm Bureau membership who bred dogs who were very angry about that. So that I can't say that for sure, but that's my guess. So that they are definitely on the pro side, and they are trying to do things to pass it.
It seems that some of these amendments that have passed, that they have gotten popular support in the more urban areas, but that is where the people of the state live. And there was an argument from the opposition that included that it takes away the idea of one person, one vote if all 8 congressional districts have to approve it, plus a majority of the state. Can you explain that argument?
Yeah,
opposition.
Let's say you have a constitutional amendment that says the state official football team is going to be the Battlehawks or something like that. And
it's going to be the only pro team in Missouri eventually.
I actually think it is, but let's just I'm going to go somewhere with this. I promise. So let's say that goes up on the ballot under this system, and it passes in 7 out of 8 congressional districts with like 90% of the vote. But then you get to the 5th congressional district, who want it to be the Chiefs for some reason, even though the Chiefs are leaving. And if that fails in the 5th congressional district by 1 vote, the whole thing fails because it will not have passed in 8 out of 8 congressional districts.
I remember doing the math on like what percentage of voters in the state could kill a constitutional amendment, and it was something
like 1 in 5, right?
I think it's like 5%.
Yeah, it's somewhere between like 5 and 8% of voters could kill a constitutional amendment in the state of Missouri.
So here's
if this initiative petition reform passes.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, Alex, because one of the questions I asked Garrett Hawkins is, how confident are you that if this passes, that this dual system where you have one system for initiative petitions, but a completely different one for state legislative driven amendments is going to stand in court? Because if that standard you can't have a dual standard and everything is 8 out of 8 congressional districts. Well, I would say you've just legalized abortion forever. You've legalized marijuana forever. You will never be able to repeal or change Medicaid expansion ever because the legislature won't be able to put anything on. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I guarantee you that if this passes, that will be like one of the first lawsuits passed or put forward, because like there's an obvious equal protection of the U.S. Constitution violation there.
There's nothing inherently different about an initiative petition, constitutional amendment, or a legislative constitutional amendment. The arguments advanced when Democrats attempted to say what sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. Let's make 8 of 8 apply to the constitutional legislative constitutional amendments was, well, it passed the legislature, so we know it has broad support among the state.
And that they were elected. And
that they were elected. They are all supporting it, or it's getting a majority support there. So we've done the vetting. We've done the pre-investigation, whatever you want to call it.
Now, it's because the people elect our legislators, which is the argument, exactly the argument that they say, and that the standard should be higher if it's just the people. So, but I realize a lot of people don't like that reasoning.
No.
That was their argument, was we are the representatives of the people, and by us voting on these constitutional amendments to put them on the ballot, we've sort of taken that first step.
So I want to just be clear. There are states that have higher thresholds than just a majority vote. And there are states like Illinois where it is extraordinarily hard to get a constitutional change up for a statewide vote. A lot of people in Illinois have wanted to change the redistricting system there and have had no luck.
Does Illinois even have an initiative petition process?
I think it only deals with small structures of amendments.
Yeah.
But it's not the same as it was in Missouri.
It's very restrictive for a state that is like seen as the bastion of freedom for everything. It is very hard to do initiative petitions, and for some reason they elect their Supreme Court justices directly, which for as a Missourian does not make any sense. But that's a whole other story altogether. So my point for bringing this up is I would say that it is not unusual to have a higher standard. I definitely think it's unusual to have 8 out of 8 congressional districts. I don't think there's any other state in the country with this high of a standard, specifically just for initiative petition-driven constitutional amendments.
Yeah.
And Missouri is one of 18 states that have an initiative petition process. Another argument that the Missouri Farm Bureau makes is that the Constitution should be a guiding document. It should be a framework, and that the Constitution should be something that is extremely hard to amend.
So I would say in a perfect world, it would be great if marijuana, like tiny, minuscule marijuana regulations were not in the Missouri Constitution.
I think it's a fifth of the Missouri Constitution.
Yeah. I think it would probably be better if that was a statute, but it's not because the legislature didn't legalize marijuana.
And here is the flip side of that. By putting it in the Constitution, lawmakers cannot then go and change it without a vote of the people.
And we just saw that last year when, through a statute change, there was an attempt to raise the minimum wage and implement paid sick leave. And then lawmakers literally months later went and repealed that. And so there is a concern that lawmakers will not uphold, and proof in that instance that would not uphold the will of the voters in that instance.
Yeah.
And so by putting it in the Constitution, it makes it harder to do that. I don't disagree with Jason where I think maybe there's some things that shouldn't be in the Constitution, but when you have that, but I think it's the consequences of lawmakers either going back on what something said or not doing something.
And I also want to say, like, one thing that I think is indisputably true that the Farm Bureau and the critics of the IP process put forward is there are absolutely initiative petitions that are guided by special interest groups that want more favorable regulation for themselves. Like the fact that sports betting was put forward by the sports betting companies.
Really belong in the Constitution, that you can place a bet on the Battlehawks quarterback to throw for 20 yards. Does that belong in the Constitution?
I'm not. You're asking the wrong person, Alex, because I think that sports betting is stupid and nobody should do it. But that doesn't mean I think it should be illegal, and that's a whole different question. But my point is they created a system that is very favorable in terms of taxation to the sports betting companies. The marijuana system we have in Missouri is very favorable to people who have licenses in that industry. All of that is 100% true. But at the same time, like, the legislature could have created systems that had better taxation policy or that would have allowed for a more diverse group of license holders in the marijuana industry. But they didn't. And this is what happens when you don't do anything. Or even with Medicaid expansion, there has been an argument that you're probably going to hear over the next 2 or 3 years that, well, now that we have to pay more from general revenue for Medicaid expansion, we're going to have to cut things. Well, that may be true, but the fact that, like, Medicaid expansion wasn't done when it was done meant that now it's in the Constitution. Like, inaction meant that you can't have that release valve because you don't have it because the legislature didn't act.
So in other words, the solution to the problem for lawmakers, instead of going to 8 of 8, would be to just do something.
Yes, you are more artful than I was.
Ultimately that is the argument, is like you could say these things belong there or not, but they're there because of legislative inaction or resistance to something that clearly had popular support.
And the Missouri Farm Bureau that supports it, they were making to argue that partisan interest can come into Kansas City and St. Louis, dump a bunch of money to get something to pass. But I was critically listening to it, and the flip argument that if there is an amendment up for a vote, that they could go into a rural, one of any of the congressional districts, just dump a money into that one congressional district, and as long as that congressional district votes no, then it's done.
Well, I think you can also do the flip side of that. Let's say that there is a IP constitutional amendment that bans all data centers and seizes all the data center property and gives it to everybody to turn into giant gyms. Wow, I guess one person really liked that idea. So what I guess a company like, I don't know, Google or Meta or Elon Musk, although he wants to put them in space, I don't think he really
Sure.
I don't think he really cares about land data.
Jason, what's your point?
My point is that you could just have those companies say, hey, St. Louis, we're taking away economic development opportunity from you. Vote no on this. And they could just get St. Louis to, not ban data centers. Like either side.
Yeah, and ultimately it has to be, as we talked about, an idea that people like. It still requires a majority vote if it's going to be something that people, money included, however many people are swayed. It still has to be something that's in theory popular. I also want to push back, Alex, on the idea of the sanctity of the Missouri Constitution, of that as an argument. I don't think people care about that. They say, I want marijuana. I want to be able to go and bet on sports and not have to drive across to Illinois. I want, Medicaid expansion. I don't really care about the sanctity of the Constitution. So that argument
is very much a political nerd kind of.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't know how much the everyday Missourian is going to care about how long the Constitution is, as long as they're getting the policies that they want out of it.
Because sports betting was time and time again, it was talked about in the legislature, and then these
one guy stopped sports betting year after year.
Secretary of State, I believe.
Yes. And because they couldn't get it done, the people were like, or the gambling interests knew of this, and they were like, well, we're just going to go the constitutional.
But to be fair, I was deriding that as a special interest amendment, and I think it's true, but I think it's also true that a lot of people wanted sports betting, and they wouldn't have signed the petition if they didn't want it. Similar to how if people didn't want legal marijuana, they wouldn't have signed the petition and it wouldn't have passed. I don't even think legal marijuana, that wasn't really that close, was it?
There's a difference between wanting an idea in concept, though, and what actually comes out when a group with a vested interest in the outcome writes the provision.
But the citizen's not going to know that.
That is
so
true.
That's the question,
that is true.
Knowing whether or not the end product is the same. They can sports bet whether or not it's a better system for Missouri or not. I can bet on Lars Newbar to hit a home run tomorrow. That's the end product that I personally want.
Yeah. Probably safer to bet on Jordan Walker at this point.
And I will just say, sports betting was extraordinarily close. It almost went to a recount because there are people, I think, on both sides of the political spectrum that think sports betting is stupid and addictive and wasteful. But there are a lot of people who think it's fun and you could win money by betting on Lars Nootbaar slam dunking or something. Now, I'm kidding. I know he's a baseball player. I just like saying slam dunks. Keep going.
Well, I promise to have you all out of here by 8:30. So in our last 4 minutes, I want to ask each of our panelists what they'll be watching for, whether it's one of the specific ballots that we talked about or something else on the August 4th primary ballot. Jason, let's start with you.
The thing I'm going to be looking for is that if Amendment 5 fails, which I think if I had to bet on it, I would say...
Kalshi is a thing.
I would say the chances of that failing are pretty high. Does that also bring Amendment 4 down? Because one of the things... because I was talking so much and going in 7 different directions, as somebody like me does, there is organized opposition to Amendment 4 from also the Missouri Association of Realtors. They're trying to take down Amendment 5 and Amendment 4. So I don't expect Amendment 4 to fail by as large of a margin as Amendment 5 if Amendment 5 fails, but it will be interesting to see if there's linkage between the two.
I'm really interested in the margins of Amendment 5, of whether or not, if it does fail, I'm on Jason's inclination. I don't see it being successful, but you never know. But I am curious of how much it fails, because it feels like there is obviously a campaign for it. It doesn't feel as robust as the campaign against it. And I'm curious how much politics ultimately doesn't matter as far as what the different parties want, and people say no or yes. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets pretty high in the negatives, but we'll see.
I'll watch that. I'm also curious to see if what happens with Proposition U in the county, if for whatever reason it clicks this time and St. Louis County voters say, yeah, okay, I'm fine passing another tax on my Amazon product. And then, as Jason mentioned, what happens if they don't get the revenue? Because they are somewhat, I think, counting on it to be able to sustain the level of service that the county is currently providing. And if they don't get it in, there are a lot of areas, like Jason said, they'll probably have to cut back on. Council chair has told me they'll have to go back to their charter duties only, which are a very kind of narrow band of the St. Louis County Council, or St. Louis County must do X, Y, and Z, and wouldn't have any of the other miscellaneous things like health clinics or other elements that are not explicitly outlined in the charter.
Rachel Lippmann, Sarah Kellogg, and Jason Rosenbaum, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was St. Louis Public Radio State House reporter Sarah Kellogg, Justice reporter Rachel Lippmann, and politics correspondent Jason Rosenbaum at a recent community event about local and statewide propositions and amendments moderated by St. Louis on the Air producer Alex Heuer. To read the full voter guide, visit stlpr.org/voter guide. This episode was produced by our executive producer, Alex Heuer. Edited by Maya Norfleet and engineered by Jim Heuer. Additional support from Lila Halabashich. Special thanks to panelists Jason Rosenbaum, Sarah Kellogg, and Rachel Lippmann, and to politics editor Fred Ehrlich. And to our events team, Leslie Davis and Maya Williams. This podcast was mixed by Aaron Doerr.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.